Hi, hello, and welcome to Recruiting Live. It's that time of the week. If you saw my post on the chat, we held the show for a minute to respect the national moment of silence for everything that's been happening this week. And that's not our topic today, but something that I know we could all talk about and have our own opinions. But today, right now, is about recruiting, and hopefully something that could be entertaining and light in the context of all these really hard things that are happening. My name is Katrina Kibben, not Ryan Leary. I still need to fix that. And this is Recruiting Live. And I know that we have a few new people on the line. So just want to give you a little context of what Recruiting Live is. So Recruiting Live is not a webinar. If you're expecting slides or you're expecting some kind of presentation, that's not going to happen today. What is going to happen today is a conversation about recruiting. And today I brought one of my favorite guys to just like chat for hours with, and I think the first time we actually talked for probably about 2 hours. Am I right?
At least.
Yeah.
That
So,
was great.
why don't you tell people a little bit about your background and your context of recruiting?
Okay, my name's Alan Fluhrer. I'm a 20-plus year recruiter, recruiting manager, etc. I've done agency. I've had my own firm. I've done work in banking, finance, high tech. Shout out to Derek Zeller. We've both done high-level, top-secret government intelligence work. We could tell you who it was with, but we'd have to track you down and kill you. I come from the perspective of both old school and new school, where new school, there's all kinds of tools out there. I'm a wannabe geek junkie. I want to try everything possible, but it's a tool. It's a marker. It's a pen. It's a phone. And what helps us do our job better. And then old school is, pardon my French, get on the phone. Uh, and I love this group, and just for the new folks here, let me let you in on a really quick little secret. Bookmark this site. Whether it's these chats or the site or whatever, bookmark it. The people are on here are not the 20 of the 80%. They're the 5 of the 100% that do work, that are great at what they do. We take care of our own and we help each other out. Enough about that. And Katrina's thing about us talking for 2 hours, this happens in the business where we call up and say, hey, I got a question. And then the next thing you know, we've already got 6 things talked about, solved, addressed, or you got to call Ryan or Derek or whoever. So exactly. I come from the school of, I've represented candidates. I have, as a third-party recruiter, worked for clients and represented them. I look at things on a balance. I don't look at it from, I got to do whatever I can to get a fee, or I got to get this person in as an internal because the VP is yelling at me. I want to make sure we get the best person and do everything possible up front to qualify, screen, evaluate, and present the best people. And maybe it doesn't look like the right person, but it is.
Exactly. And I think two things that I've really learned from you in all the time that we've talked is the first one is always understanding the value proposition. And understanding it on both sides of the recruiting equation. And I think the other piece is about candidate interaction, right? So it's about what's the right question? How do we tell a little bit more of their story? Like, how do we get a little bit more of their story? And so I wanted to start today by talking about the first question we ask candidates, and it's not how you doing. There's a better question to ask, and there's a better question to ask than why do you want to work here?
Yeah.
So why don't you dig into that a little bit about what that first question is and why you ask that question?
Okay, so before we do that, really quick, I want to share a quick experience about the wrong thing to do. Did a call respectfully a few weeks ago with a company that starts with an A, ends at an N, sounds like Cabazon. It was a half-an-hour call, 6 questions. I kid you not, from a 6-year recruiting manager, the first 4 questions were all Boolean syntax. How would you do this search? And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, really? Okay, so that's what not to do. What I do is I look at the person's profile. If I have a resume, I look at it. I've been doing this long enough, I can usually get a sense of a person initially, and I'll call up and say, hey, Katrina, you were referred to us. I was really impressed with what I've seen. I'd love to have a conversation and ask you a couple of things about X. They know who I am. They know what I do. I don't need to come at them right away and say, hey, Katrina, I want to talk to you about a job. It's like, I'd like to learn about you. I'd like to get to know you. I want to open it up. I want to put them at ease. I want to start a back and forth so we can dig deep and figure out, like to your point, the value proposition, because you may be a phenomenal candidate, and this might not be the right fit for you. Or you might be a really good candidate, and this might be perfect, and I want to find that out. So it's, let's talk. So you're at IBM right now, and you're doing Oracle SQL Server. You're doing X. So tell me about that. Also, tell me about that gives me the tone of trying to determine their communication style, their effectiveness, a whole bunch of other things that I'm looking for when I ask that question. And based on their answers, I have my other questions, but it leads me down a different road instead of just going down a checklist.
Exactly. And I think it also starts to help you identify similarities between them and the team that they're going to be on. Last week when David was on, we talked a little bit about expanders and contractors. Like, it's a communication style, right? It's the person who gives you a little too much information or the person who doesn't give you enough, and you have to kind of pull it out. And, you know, they're more of a work samples style person. I typically categorize engineers in that category. So, but I think there's something to be said for understanding their communication style, not just what they do, when you're actually trying to make a good fit.
I think you're right. And one of the things that I learned from a really good EVP, a lady, and I sat in on interviews, and she had this one particular strategy, and she was very clear. It was not a trip up. She would ask her first question, and then she said, Katrina, can you tell me about X? As soon as you started, she'd say, oh, and I'm sorry. Also, what about da-da-da? Now, please continue. Now, she was looking for Katrina to answer both questions. She was interested in both answers legitimately. If Katrina didn't answer the second question, it was not points off, knockdown. It was just, oh. Then she said, okay, and what about this? Oh, and Katrina said, oh, yeah, sorry, I missed that. Da-da-da-da-da. And her thing, it wasn't, now this person is less. It was, if they do respond to both questions, it's just a little bit extra. And it was no judgment call on skill. It was about communication style and listening ability for her.
It is.
And
yeah,
I found
David just said, that's sneaky good.
Well, and it's also on where you come from, that you're not using it as a trip up, where when I get to a person and we've had 10, 20-minute conversation and we've covered a lot of bases, and I want to discover some other things, I'll say, look, Katrina, we've discussed the job, I've told you some things, we've shared some things. Let me ask you this. Why are we talking? Now, it's very...
way to phrase that. Why do you want to leave your current company? Because I think when you say, why do you want to leave your current company, people instantly get in that, like, protection mode. Like, well, my manager and I... But they have to say the right thing. They think there's a right answer.
And why are we talking? Sometimes not only gives you additional information about the candidate, it may give you information about the company and a situation that either identifies them as even better or what have you, where a company's about to be acquired, there's about to be a layoff, there's about to be something. The commission structure, more times than I can, well, you know, they changed the commission structure because the bosses wanted to get more bonus, so we get screwed. And you're like, oh, ding, ding, ding. Okay, it's a reason they're leaving. And the other thing within that is I want to discover, is the person looking to go to an opportunity, or is it an Enron thing, if you will, where I want to be anywhere but where I'm at now? And that is subtle, but very important.
Yeah.
And
I call those rats fleeing the ship.
yeah.
Well, so David said exactly, it's not a gotcha conversation. I have a question for you. Why do you think people use gotcha conversations in the first place?
I think it's a couple of reasons. Number one, back to the, I'll say 90-10 rule, that I think a lot of recruiters were taught wrong. I think that they've been taught to eliminate as many as possible, and if it's a gotcha question, that does it. And I also think it's a big part of they're not self-aware of themselves enough to know that this isn't about, okay, you've got 3 years with Java, you've got SQL Server, you've got C sharp, and you've got this. But how many pancakes can you make in an hour? What?
Exactly. You're like,
And I think gotcha questions are hopefully going by the wayside, but this Cabazon one I had the other day, I think it's less structured. I think it's people in either a very structured environment, they don't have a choice, or they're not evolved enough to work off of their own self-knowledge.
yeah.
And they
A
need to
few
get
people chiming in here about this one. So David saying, gotcha is more about the interviewer showing off or trying to minimize the candidate. And it's pretty selfish. Like, I don't think any candidate is having that experience and is like, this is awesome. Thanks for the trick question.
I think he's right, and I think it also goes back to hiring managers that have been in companies for many, 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 many years and have drank the Kool-Aid, and it's, well, I'm part of IBM, and we're right because, well, we're IBM, or we're Microsoft, or we're Joe's car service, and they think that any question they ask is appropriate. And the gotcha questions just tend to be trip-up ones and egotistical ones of the hiring manager. It also tells you that the hiring manager really doesn't know what they're talking about in many cases. And a great example of that is, tell me about your strengths and weaknesses. I think a straight-out strengths and weaknesses question is a great sucker question that tells me so much about the lack of experience that the interviewer has.
Right. Yeah. And that's the stuff you get off of checklists. Like,
Well,
that's not.
and it's also, I also think junior recruiters in the industry, I think, have been done a disservice in the last 5 to 7 years when they've been given the crutch tools of LinkedIn Recruiter, Monster Career Builder. They haven't been given training. They have not had the advantages of growing up in an agency and then moving up and moving on and having good mentors. And I think that in the last 2 to 3 years, junior recruiters are even worse because in agencies, all they see is the money, and it's buy the numbers, do the numbers, and then you'll be successful. Okay, fine, that's one aspect of recruiting. But the gotcha questions tell you a lot about, unbeknownst to the interviewer, tell you a lot about their lack of experience.
Yeah. And their ego. That's what Tom Bolt just said. Gotcha questions reflect the ego of the person asking in the first place.
Well, and I really wish there was a good answer to that. Actually, the Cabazon one that I did, I shot back in a very professional way after I said, hey, do you store your Boolean searches? And she goes, oh, yes, I do. I said, oh, wonderful. Well, let me see if I can. I mean, something I learned, wanting to be very gentle about it. I said, where do you store them? She said, oh, Microsoft Word. And I said, I used to do that too. The funny thing is the default quotes in Word work against Boolean and give you bad results. Somebody had told me put them in Excel because that quote works. And all of a sudden there was dead silence. And I was thinking, I was really nice. I said it professionally. Why is somebody mad? I don't know why you got this title.
Right. It sounds like a few of the other people on this call also received that awkward call from this mystery company.
I also do like asking about their projects. Tell me about your project.
Yes.
And I also like trying to focus in on like the most minute technical aspect of it. And as an example, when I used to have to find virtual device driver people, by default, somebody that knew how to work VXD had to have all the Microsoft, probably assembly, probably C. But I'd say, hey, Katrina, you mentioned VXDs on here. Can you do me a favor? What was a project you worked on with that? I think it's a really cool thing. And by the way, and we've talked about this, can you tell me like I'm a third grader?
Yes. I love that question because how many times do people go, what do you do? And you explain it and the look, it's just like, huh? And when you do that, I think it also reflects your ego in that you don't assume that you know everything.
Yeah.
You're not pretending to know exactly what they do or how they do it. And when you say like, tell me like I'm a third grader, I think that's a leveling. It reflects your ego, which is a good thing.
And I think one of the things I used to do for recruiters when I would train them, junior ones, and it was a little harsh, I think, maybe, but because I think all of us that are many people on the group here, we can talk to developers. We can talk to somebody grocery store line and find out what they do before we've checked out. I would take them down to, I take them in the office building. I'd say, okay, there's going to be one person that gets in the elevator with us. I want you to say hello. I want you to introduce yourself. I want you to say, I was just curious. I've seen you around. Where do you work? Oh, really? You can ask what you do. Oh, wow, that's really interesting. Everybody works hard. Everybody's overworked. Everybody has too much to do. Even a dog walker. And if you can sympathize and empathize with them and
Yes.
listen to them, they will tell you everything you need to know, sometimes without even asking.
Yep.
Garrett,
Um,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
no, I was just going to say I was on an interview, not for myself. We were interviewing someone, and someone on the call asked, "Can you tell me?" He said, "Everyone is misunderstood. How are you misunderstood?"
Hmm.
And I thought that was one of those questions that you're like, huh. Like because it's self-reflecting, right? It's actually understanding where you stand and how people it's not saying you're a bad person. It's not saying like what are your weaknesses. But it's just saying like how might people misunderstand your work or your style? Especially when you have a client or, like on our company, like we have a very specific personality type. Like you need to be a brush your knees off and keep going kind of person. And when we ask that question, you want to hear the part about like how did I resolve this? How do I explain myself? And how do I move to the next step?
And too many people think they're in that protected interview mode where everything's perfect, they've never had a mistake, and they got to and they're the only person in the world that ever got there. And I think your question is great. I think the deeper questions about, and you have to be at a certain point in the conversation, but tell me
Right.
about a time, tell me about a time you failed.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm not asking professional. I've had people tell me personal, but they also, like you said, they'll tell me the resolution, they'll tell me what they did, they'll tell me how they approached it, and it tells me their level of maturity and self-assurance, and at the end, they might say, and we ended up getting most of it done. It did eventually get implemented, and it's a fascinating question, and it's meant very genuinely, and you also have to watch your tone, I think, and your
Yes.
personality to just and gauge the back and forth because if hey they might be in a conference room, they might have people walking next by them, they might need to step out, and you need to listen and be aware, and if you
Yeah.
are, you're being respectful.
Exactly. I was just looking to see if Animal's on because earlier I was listening to his show earlier this week,
Mm.
and Jerry was like, "Look, sometimes you know when somebody thinks that you're an asshole, and when they do, it's time to hang up the phone. Like, don't ask for another referral. Don't ask another question. If you can tell that they think you're an asshole, hang up the phone." So, when what are some what's some advice you have for when you walk away in a conversation? So, you're having this conversation. What are some of the points where you're like, all right,
This
it's
is going
stopping
well.
point. Yeah.
Okay. There have been times when the person was an asshole or they were fishing for a 50% raise, or what have you, or they only wanted to talk to us because we called them. And
Yeah.
sometimes I'll stop the conversation and I'll hey, look, Jerry, maybe, look, this is what I'm looking for. We've had a conversation. I think I've made a mistake. What I'd like to do is talk to you. Let me ask you this, Jerry. Are you interested in talking about this position that we need to talk about? If you are, great, let's continue. If not, let's keep in touch.
Yeah.
And that gives them the option of, oh, it's kind of a verbal slap. It's, oh, I've been caught.
Yeah.
Um, you know, I had one guy one time tell me, Alan, all I want to know is the rate and the per diem. And I said, you live 15 from it. There's no per diem. I always get per diem. I think I've obviously made a mistake. Tell you what, I'm going to go check on some things. I'll email you back. I won't be calling you. Thanks. I'll talk to you later. I hung up. and and he starts calling back like, I'm sorry, I didn't mean. I said, no, you did this to me on a first call. You frightened me what you might do in an interview.
Right? Isn't that the sales technique they call it the takeaway? And you're like,
Well,
nope, you can't have it.
well, and I also do it gently with a very qualified person,
Yeah.
where it's, look, we've talked. I think I'm seeing some things here, Katrina, but I want to make sure you're comfortable with it. I'm not sure if it's a fit. Can you help me with this?
Yeah.
And
So,
that, go ahead.
no, no, no. I just noticed that we're coming up on time, which always happens with this
Oh my
show.
God.
Um, but something else that you and I have talked a lot about is coaching.
Mhm.
How do you coach new recruiters on questions who don't have the extensive experience that you have?
I think there's a couple of ways to do it. Number one is literally role playing. I would go in and listen to their calls. I would, and then we would talk about them, or we would actually do a back and forth. One of the things that I think here's a huge technical trick: voice recorder.
Yep.
Now, I used to use and like, and the way I would ask questions, I would record my side of the phone calls for legal reasons, and then I learned a great deal about the way I talk, the way I ask the
Yeah, I
questions,
like that.
and that oh my God, I was talking like this, and I was like, talking really too fast to get everything in, and then I learned to pregnant pause, and it was much more effective. And so coaching, if there's a good coach that everybody gets along with, great. I think letting them sit in with executives that might have similar skill sets. There are executives that might be financial, technical, that are willing to coach. I will sit in on. I used to bring them in on in-person interviews with good managers. I would walk through and we would whiteboard a decision tree of,
Mhm.
okay, you started here and you went here, but I think, and this was good, and I think this might even make it better, or here's where I think you lost them, and it might be on the candidate side, but I think in-person mentoring. I do think that agency experience for corporate recruiters is critical these days, or to at least have spent some time at an agency. You learn so much,
Right.
and I'm not going to plug a huge book, but there's an old consulting sales book called Spin Selling. It is dry as heck. It is boring as all get out, but it has some really good consultative question levels of, here's the first level question, here's the second, and once you get to the third, that's really good. And I took it, and it took me a long time to write it out for what can I use. And I'm always open to listening to anybody for
Yeah.
anything.
I think that's part of it is the evolution of learning, right? It's not everything doesn't have to happen up front. Sometimes the best coaching you can do is to point people to other resources.
And also for recruiters, one thing I did a couple of times was, there's a trade magazine, Sales and Marketing Management or something, and there was a cover story of a gentleman that was top salesman for some company, and I went to the recruiter that wanted to learn, and I said, here, call this guy. This guy.
Yeah.
What? Yeah, call him. Ask him how he does what he does. He does it so well. Ask him. You'll probably learn some things from recruiting. But he sells this tech stuff. I said, call him. Tell me when you've reached him. He's not going to call me back. He'll call you back. Trust me, he'll call you back. It took 4 or 5 times. The guy called back. They had a wonderful conversation. The recruiter came back and, oh my God, he was telling me this. I learned this. I have to go do that. Can we sign up for this class? Can I buy this book? And it was like, see, I said, and the simple act of doing it, in my opinion, I said, the fact that you did it, you've grown. And
Yeah.
I think that's a lot of it, because we can't tell people things. There's times when, kind of the Karate Kid, I want you to, wax on, wax off, go dig the ditch. It's not about digging the ditch. It's about getting to the point of digging the ditch.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
and I think there's also a confidence and comfort level that people get to, right? Where they've like if you swing a bat enough, you eventually get to like the comfortable swing. And that's you have to have people who have thick enough skin to take that many swings in the first place. But then they get in the groove and they can have the conversation. I think, where you're at, you're like, got this. Yeah, let's talk. I can talk to anybody. Um, But I imagine that getting people comfortable to fail
Mhm.
in candidate interaction is tough to coach.
It is, and you need to do it in a respectful, you almost need to do it in a familial way where I was at agencies that were vicious. I was at agencies where wasn't the best agency, but the cadre that I got in with were really good. We could go into each other's office. Here, we kind of heard each other's phone calls, and we'd say, okay, who are you just talking to? Oh, the VP of the CTO of Kaiser for this division. Okay, I just want to offer you something, Alan. You were telling it. I think I heard you laughing. You might want to be a little more professional, elevate yourself a little bit more on the first conversation. And I said, I was trying to, but he started cracking jokes. And the guy goes, oh, okay, no, that's good. I'm glad you said that. So what I would do if I were you is go ahead and laugh at them, but then back yourself up a little bit and still elevate yourself. Don't tell the knock knock joke, but tell the bear and the rabbit joke. It's a little less, and you have hit people a little bit more, but you've been the professional. And I think you need to do that because recruiters will walk through fire for our candidates and our clients. We also need good managers that'll walk through fire for us and
Right.
protect us. And I think in recruiting, while finding good recruiters is horribly difficult, I think finding recruiting managers is even worse, harder, because you need the recruiting experience, the management experience, and the self-awareness to say, no, Mr. Manager, you just didn't go for these 3 interviews. Today's Friday, and you want to see 5 more people by next Wednesday? No. I have to
Yes.
figure out a way to say, realistically, I think Katrina, a week from Wednesday is realistic to
Yep.
have quality. I said, look, you want a couple of resumes, I'll get you resumes, you make the calls, but we have no responsibility for it. In a professional manner, I think management needs to do that partnership and push back. And I think it's on its way, but it's just at the nascent infant level.
Absolutely. And Alan, that's our time. I don't even know these conversations. It's like done.
I love it.
And one plug on that hiring manager conversation. I know Amy Ella Miller is on this
Yeah,
chat today, and she's doing a webinar on Tuesday about managing your hiring manager.
saw that.
And she'll have more tips that I think go right with what you're saying. Typically, that's her message too. Um, and next week on Recruiting Live, which by the way you're all registered for because you've already registered for Recruiting Live before, is with Maureen Sharif. So we're
Oh,
going to talk about phone sourcing, getting back on the phone. That page is already live. If you want to share it with anyone else, it's on recruitingtools.com and it's under the How To tab under Upcoming. So you can find that. You can share it with a friend, please, so we can have more people on here learning all these great tips. Alan, thank you, thank you, thank you. I
oh,
really appreciate your time.
this was
Um,
wonderful. Yeah. And
hey,
hello to everybody on there.
yes, everyone's saying great stuff. All the cheers for Alan. And we will see all of you same time, same place next week. Bye, guys.
Have a good weekend.